The sentence fell to the center of the glass table as if someone had thrown a dead weight. The sound of the air conditioning continued to hiss, insistent, and was the only thing that moved in the room. I kept the pen resting on the pad, tip poised, as if I could draw a way out at that moment. The clock on the wall ticked once, and that beat became my metronome. Eduardo leaned back, smoothing the metal clasp of his watch on his wrist, the gesture of someone who organizes other people's time. The woman from HR adjusted her necklace, swallowed hard, and smiled that aseptic office smile. The legal department pretended to read their own screen. No one looked me in the eye. I was noise that could be avoided. "It's not personal," he said in clear Portuguese, as if correcting the grammar of his own prejudice that head count closed. "The client wants a different positioning. You've already played a key role in visibility initiatives." Visibility. The word floated between us, viscous. I thought about the LinkedIn photos, the Diversity Month banner, the invitations to represent the company, while my proposals sat in folders labeled idiots. I bit the pen until I heard the plastic give. I breathed through my nose. The air tasted like coins. "Your profile is very specific," added HR, the voice of someone who practices yoga. "We can connect you with diversity programs if you'd like." Diversity program. Not management, not budget, not leadership. The poster behind them read transparency, courage, belonging. I wanted to laugh, but I held it back. I learned early to hide my laughter like someone hiding a blade. "What criteria support this decision?" My voice was low, smooth. Decades of training not to be called aggressive. "My profile or my ideas?" Silence. The cursor blinked on Eduardo's laptop screen. Behind the email window, a blue rectangle. Barrow Vivo case. Eduardo's final team. I recognized the palette, the sequence of frames, the order of the testimonies I'd collected while walking at night, asking permission before filming, jotting down the name of every merchant no one considered relevant. My stomach sank, and at the same time, a clarity crackled inside. There was the robbery, reflected in the glass, banal as an icon. "Let's formalize your transition," he said. Transition, as if offering a ride to the door. "We want it to be smooth." The word hit my eardrum like sandpaper. The HR woman pulled a sheaf of documents from her briefcase, their staples gleaming. Termination document. Confidentiality. No firing. No firing, a gag in bureaucratic jargon. I glanced at the edges of the room. The glass with 2 fingerprints, the plant no one waters properly, the reflection of the developers on the other side of the aquarium, the small blue fires of the monitors. It's at the edges that the truth leaks. On the glass film, the slide still trembled, as if asking to be seen. I saw it. I recorded it. My mother sewing the hem of my first blazer flashed through my memory. "If you don't fit in the sentence, daughter, write another one." The pen rested between my fingers like a screwdriver. I tested the rotation, heard the click. My cell phone inside my bag felt different. My thumb instinctively found the side button. A delicate vibration responded from the bone. The recorder woke up silently. Eduardo opened his arms, the priest of pragmatism. "You communicate very well," HR agreed, satisfied. "You don't even seem nervous." I was nervous, but more than that, I was awake. The initial insult no longer burned like fire. It burned like a soldering iron, sealing a decision. The cold light of the lamps cast geometric shadows on his cheeks. I thought of the meetings where they'd told me to be careful not to politicize. The times they'd repeated my idea in a different voice, the kind of praise that's like a dog's bell. Patience is also a strategy. And I'd accumulated enough for a silent war. The red folder slid across the table toward me. The plastic gleamed like something new. I read it without reading it. Clauses, deadlines, formal acknowledgments. Your cycle ends. The cycle they decide at the appropriate time. I signed my name with a full stroke. I let the pen rest. I looked up. "I understand," I said, and the words stood solidly beside me. "You already have enough representation. Enough for the photo." He smiled from the corner of his mouth, as if he felt he'd won. I returned a smile so small it fit in the gap between my teeth. Inside, a file was being organized. Spoken phrase, exact time, reflected file, titles, names, everything numbered. When I stood up, I saw the blue slide glinting on the glass again. Eduardo team. Audacity in the open because impunity gives good vision. I picked up the envelope, aligned the edge on the table, and straightened my blazer. The air conditioning hissed louder, as if the room were breathing for us. And as the doorknob turned, I mentally noted the last detail. His eyes didn't follow me to the door. They stopped on the clock. Time for him was a matter of control. For me, from that moment on, it would be a matter of testing. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was dry, almost cruel. Formalized. The word struck me more than the gesture itself. The HR woman pushed the manila envelope toward me, with that smile that seemed to have been rehearsed in front of a mirror, the corporate version of compassion. "Here are your documents," he said without looking at me. "And your letter of recommendation, of course." Letter of recommendation. The irony made me swallow my laughter. They were taking away what I had built, but they wanted to appear fair, even generous. I took the envelope slowly, feeling the warm paper in her hands. Everything there was an act. The neutral tone of voice, the averted glances, the heavy silence. I was the mistake they were trying to erase with kindness. Eduardo stood, straightening his jacket. "It was a difficult decision," he said, with the theatrical tone of someone who believes his own lie. "But I believe you'll find a more harmonious environment. Aligned." Funny how corporate racists have a knack for choosing words that seem harmless. He looked at me the way you look at a painting about to be replaced on the wall. With respect, but without importance. "I just hope," I continued, my voice calm, "that this alignment you seek doesn't mean erasing the work of others." The corner of his mouth twitched, but he kept his smile. The kind of smile that melts in the mirror. The HR woman cleared her throat, eager to wrap up the show. "We'll send everything by email, okay? And any questions?" "I know," I interrupted. "All by email." Gathered my things. My pen, my badge, the small notebook with field notes from the project, the same one that now bore his name. Walking down the hallway was like walking through a graveyard of stairs. Every colleague pretended not to see me. Some looked at their screens, others at their shoes. The sound of my footsteps echoed too loudly. When the elevator opened, the reflection in the glass showed me a firm woman. Tired but whole. For a moment I thought about collapsing. But collapsing is a luxury for those who've never had to get back up. My phone vibrated inside my bag. Message from Carla. "Don't sign anything else without showing it to me. They're hiding something." The warning made my heart beat slower. I knew that instinct. When a black woman warns you not to trust, the ground has already cracked before you know it. I left the building with the envelope under my arm and the feeling of carrying a body, that of my own dignity. Outside, the sun hit me like a thermal shock. I closed my eyes for a second and breathed. The wind carried the metallic smell of the streets, and in the midst of the crowd, something shifted inside me. I no longer had a badge, but I still had a name. I still had a voice. I opened my purse, grabbed my phone, and tapped the recorder icon. The red button blinked for a moment before disappearing. My mother's voice echoed in my memory, ancient and precise. "When they try to silence you, daughter, record it. Their silence will work for you." I crossed the street, the sound of cars drowning out my anger. With each step, my fear receded a little. I got in the car, rested my head on the steering wheel, and closed my eyes. Eduardo's words still swirled, echoing over and over again. "We don't need another black woman here." He smiled. A small, firm smile. They didn't need to. But I knew, soon, the world would need to hear what a black woman had to say when they decided to wipe her off the map. I spent the rest of the afternoon driving aimlessly, letting the traffic swallow me up. The envelope on the passenger seat felt heavier than it actually was, as if each sheet of paper inside had absorbed the weight of all the silences I'd endured in that office. At the stoplight, I cracked the window a crack, and the warm street air mingled with the car's artificial scent. Freedom, when it arrives, sometimes tastes of iron and dust. I parked in front of a small cafe, the same one where I used to write reports after work. The barista recognized me and smiled. "The usual?" he asked. I nodded. "Routine is armor. Maintaining one can be a form of resistance." As the coffee dripped into my cup, I opened my notebook, the one left on my desk, and flipped through the scribbled pages. The ideas were all there. Diagrams, maps, loose sentences that became the backbone of the project. Living neighborhood, the colors, the tone of the interviews, the concept of community as the center of the city. It was all mine. There was no doubt. I remembered when I presented the first draft. Eduardo folded his hands and said, "The concept is good, but it sounds very emotional. You understand, right?" Emotional. That word always came up when something I did had too much soul for their comfort. He claimed to want innovation, but what he really wanted was control, especially over my voice. As I reminisced, I took my laptop out of my bag and connected to the cafe's Wi-Fi. The company's internal portal homepage was still open. Curiosity overcame fatigue. I searched for the project by its new name. Barro Vivo Case, Eduardo Team. There it was. The same photos. The same introductory text. The same stories from people I'd interviewed. But in the authorship field, my name was gone. In its place, a gray line. Multidisciplinary team. My heart pounded, but not with sadness. It was an old, familiar rhythm, that of awakening indignation. I took a screenshot. Then another. And another. I saved each one in a folder cold mirror. As I was organizing the files, a girl from the cafe approached with the order. "Is everything okay?" she asked, seeing my expression. "Okay," I replied. "I'm just learning to look at what's always been in front of me." She smiled, not understanding, and walked away. I looked outside. The city moved indifferently, and I realized that was what kept me alive. The ability to keep watching, even when they tried to erase me from the scene. I picked up my cell phone and called Carla. She answered on the third ring, her voice low, as if speaking from a hiding place. "Did you see?" asked Dias. "They launched it earlier today, and they're already promoting it on LinkedIn using my text and the video too. They just changed the narration." Closed my eyes. The sound of the surrounding cafe dissolved, leaving only the muffled sound of my own blood. "Did they leave any traces?" "They left everything," she replied. "They have Slack messages, recorded meetings. I can get them." I wrote down in my notebook. Evidence. Slack print, original video, file metadata. Carla hesitated before hanging up. "They say Eduardo will present his case tomorrow at Town Hall. They say you'll be cited as an inspiration." "Inspiration," I repeated ironically. The perfect euphemism for makeup theft. I hung up and stared at the reflection in the window. My eyes were filled with a clarity I hadn't seen in a long time. That look my grandmother called the look of someone who already understood everything. From inside the notebook, the cursor blinked, waiting for a command. I typed 3 words into Notepad. "Prove. Expose. Rewrite." I saved the file with the name draft of the return. And when I closed my notebook, I realized that the idea of revenge was no longer just an impulse, it was a project. I returned home as the sun was already sinking below the horizon, tinting the sky orange and gray, the same colors I saw reflected in the office glass every late afternoon when I was the last one to leave. I opened the door slowly, the silence of the apartment welcoming me with an honesty the workplace never had. I tossed my blazer on the couch and left the resignation envelope on the desk, still sealed. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. Bureaucracy, signatures, and the disguised attempt to reduce me to a footnote. I turned on the living room lights and sat down. The clock ticked again, steady, almost insolent. I grabbed my phone and opened Carla's messages. The screenshots she'd promised began arriving one after the other, like knocks on the door of truth. Rename the version. Take her name off the deck. Use an inclusive narrative if questioned. I stared at the messages, reading and rereading them. Each line was a scar written in corporate font. And yet, there was a strange beauty in seeing the hypocrisy so well documented. The company that prided itself on leading conversations about diversity had now left evidence in its own system. I opened my notebook and created a new folder called Traces. There I saved Carla's screenshots, the website screenshots, the audio of the dismissal, and the reflection of the renamed file. With each upload, I felt a thread of strength reconnecting within me. The pain didn't lessen, but it began to transform into a method. The sound of a notification made me look at the corner of the screen. A new email. General meeting. Town hall/presentation of the Barrow Vivo project. Cold subject, without emotion. The body of the email said, "We will have special participation from former collaborators who inspired this new phase." Inspiration. Another anesthetic word. The kind of perfume used to mask the smell of injustice. I closed my laptop and went to the window. The reflection of the city at night looked like a mosaic of tiny resistances, lights that insisted on shining even when surrounded by darkness. Downstairs, I heard the sound of a child laughing. That calmed me. I picked up the phone and dialed Carla again. I saw the invitation. "I received it too," she replied. "It seems they want to name you live as the project's mentor." "Mentor," I repeated, chuckling softly. The word they use when they need to erase their authorship but still want the appearance of respect. She was silent. Then she said, "If you're going to watch, record everything. They'll try to use your name as a shield, I know. But this time the shield will have a mirror." I hung up and sat back on the couch. I picked up the envelope and finally opened it. Inside, among the pages and stamps, was a copy of the letter of recommendation. I read the first sentence. During the time he was with us, he demonstrated exemplary conduct and unquestionable professionalism. I carefully folded the paper and placed it on the computer. That's what irritated me. The tone of protocolary respect that always replaces true justice. I took out my notebook and wrote down, "They want to use my image to clear their own name." Below, I drew a straight line and wrote, "But the light they steal will burn them in public." The sentence came out as if it weren't mine, as if it had come from something greater, an inheritance from all the women before me. Deep in her purse, her cell phone vibrated again. Another anonymous, unidentified message. "Be careful tomorrow. They'll surprise you on stage." For a second I stood still. The fear returned, but not in that paralyzing way. It was lucid fear, the kind that warns that something is about to change. I looked out the window again. The city was asleep, but inside me, something was awakening. Their plan was already drawn up, but mine was under construction, and would be much more elegant. I woke before the sun. The sky was still a gray cloth, and the city seemed to breathe slowly. I made coffee in the dark without turning on the light. The sound of the filter reminded me that routine still existed, even when the ground shifted. I sat at the table with my notebook open and began to trace a map of memories. Names, dates, phrases, everything that could become evidence. As I wrote, I realized the fear had changed form. It was no longer a lump in my throat. It was focus. The kind of calm that comes after disappointment. The kind my mother called silence before the turn. I grabbed my laptop and turned it on. The light from the screen cut through the dim room. In the corner, the folder traces shone like an open wound. I opened the evidence I'd gathered one by one. The audio recording of the dismissal, the Slack messages, the website screenshots, the gagging email. Everything there. Everything proving that they had erased me methodically and with a smile. I opened a new document and wrote at the top, "Timeline of the hoax." As I organized each fact, each hour, each name, I began to see the bigger picture. And it was almost poetic, if not tragic. They thought intelligence was theirs, and prudence was ours. They were wrong on both counts. The clock struck 7 in the morning when the sun finally broke through the curtains. The light hit the blue ribbon sewn onto the blazer hanging on the chair. I touched the fabric with my fingertips, remembering my mother. "Never make a fuss, daughter. Make history." I smiled to myself. The sentence now made more sense than ever. My cell phone vibrated. "Carla." "I didn't sleep," she said without saying good morning. "Eduardo has been rehearsing his speech since yesterday." I saw in the system that the broadcast link is scheduled for the company's official channel. Live. Perfect, I replied. That way no one can say they didn't hear. We were silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "You know, I saw the way you were yesterday. Too calm. That scares them more than any scream. Calm down is a sharp knife, Carla. They just haven't realized it yet." After I hung up, the sounds of the street began to drift through the window. A bread vendor, a dog barking, a child running. Life continued as if nothing had happened. And yet, at the same time, everything had changed. I returned to the computer and opened the company website. The meeting banner was there, huge. Celebrating new leaders. The word sounded like a joke. I took a screenshot and saved it in the folder mirror. Suddenly, what I felt wasn't anger or sadness. It was a kind of distant empathy, like someone observing their own past in ruins. Because deep down, they were trapped in the same old delusion, believing that a well-educated black woman will accept anything to avoid losing her job. But I no longer had a job to lose. I had something bigger, a name, a truth, a memory. I closed my laptop and looked at the wall in front of me. On it, a simple frame with a phrase that has always guided me. What they call rebellion, I call survival. I took a deep breath, and a laugh escaped. It was perhaps the first time in months that I had actually laughed. I grabbed my phone and recorded a short message, which I later posted on my stories. The hardest lesson of corporate life? When you're the exception they can't erase. Their silence becomes a stage. And when I step onto mine, I want you to be there. Pause the audio. I heard my tone. Firm. Serene. People always think a black woman's strength lies in her scream. But what they forget is that sometimes it resides in her whisper. The kind of whisper that precedes the storm. Smile, and I let the coffee cool, while the plan began to breathe on its own. The morning dragged by, but my mind was racing. I replayed every detail, every word, every look from the day before. And everything now fit together like a puzzle that finally made sense. At 10 o'clock, Carla's message arrived. "I got the inside plan. You need to see this." She didn't send a text, just a PDF. I opened the file and, for a few seconds, I stood there, staring at the screen without blinking. The title was straightforward, printed in corporate blue font. Crisis Plan, Reputation Management Strategies / Barrow Vivo Project. The first few lines took my breath away. If there is any negative repercussion from the dismissal, reposition my name as the project's mentor, reinforcing her historical contribution. Prioritize the image of the current leader. They had everything scripted. Control of the narrative, the use of my image, the erasure disguised as homage. A carefully rehearsed act to transform theft into symbolic recognition. I continued reading. Avoid direct contact with the former employee. If questioned, use a speech of mutual admiration. Keep your tone emotionally neutral, avoiding terms like authorship and injustice. Each sentence was a confession. Cynicism organized into bullet points. I closed my laptop and stared at the empty wall. I felt an old, thick anger rise, but at the same time, a kind of satisfaction. I had their plan. And that changed everything. I took out my cell phone and sent a short message to Carla. Now it's a mirror game. I got up, went to my room and opened the closet. I took out a wooden box where I kept things I didn't want to forget. Mementos, notebooks, photos. At the bottom, I found the flash drive my brother had given me years ago. "To keep what's yours," he'd said at the time. I plugged it into the computer and started copying the files. Audios, prints, emails, the PDF. Then I opened the Cloud app and created 3 identical, ironically named folders. Final version and V2, official and Edward and Essence. I sent the content to each of them, with encrypted links and scheduled for automatic delivery the next day, at 9:05 a.m., 5 minutes after the broadcast began. As the upload progressed, I took a sip of cold coffee. The bitter taste suited the moment. I thought about how many times I heard that I was too methodical, perfectionist, controlling. Today, these same qualities would be the difference between humiliation and justice. At 11:30, my phone vibrated again. Carla sent me a screenshot of the team's internal chat. "Eduardo, Meeting confirmed. We'll cite my name as inspiration and make it clear that we follow her legacy. The speech needs to sound human. Manager. Understood. Is she aware? Eduardo. No need. Surprise is part of the show. Smiled. It would be a surprise, yes, but not the kind he expected. I opened a browser tab and typed a message to myself, a reminder pinned to the top of the screen. Turn on recording mode at 8:55. So I got up, opened the windows and let the wind in. The street air carried the smell of ordinary life. Bread, gasoline, rain. The smell that reminded me that the world existed beyond glass offices and false professionalism. I grabbed the blue blazer from the hanger. I ran my hand over the ribbon my mother had sewn on it. So you don't forget who you are, even when they try. I haven't forgotten, on the contrary. I was remembering everything. I sat back down at the table, looked at the clock, and let the hand advance 1 second at a time. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock sharp, they would turn on the cameras, believing they had everything under control. But at 9:05, when the link was triggered, the story script would change hands. Dawn arrived without asking permission. The house was silent. Only the distant hum of the street permeated the walls. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by papers, notes, and the pale glow of my open laptop. The time no longer mattered. I was in the mode I'd learned from life. Absolute focus, unhurried and sleepless. The clock read 2:17 when I finished. Hoax timeline. Every step of the scam was documented. The first project email, the day they changed the title, the Slack conversation, the audio of my dismissal, and now the crisis plan. Had everything. Every lie dated and recorded. Opened the pasta final _version _v2 and reviewed the files one last time. I added the subtitles, named them correctly, and adjusted the automation time zone to avoid errors. 9:05 a.m. The links would be automatically sent to journalists, customers, and employees, without me having to say a word. As the upload finished, I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about me. It was about all the times a black woman was silenced with pats on the back and insincere compliments. It was about transforming the weight of exclusion into accuracy. I got up and went to the kitchen. The kettle hissed on the stove. Steam curled upward, reminiscent of the incense my mother burned when she said, "Before the war, clear the air." I did it now, cleaned it. I took out my cell phone and recorded a short audio message for Carla. It's ready. Tomorrow the stage is theirs. But the script is mine. I sent it and left the device face down, as if closing a chapter. I returned to my laptop and checked the scheduled sending timer. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for final confirmation. Click. Done. The plan was breathing on its own now. I closed my eyes and imagined the auditorium. The lights, the banners, Eduardo's fake smile trying to hide his nervousness. He thought he still controlled the narrative, but I knew him better than he knew himself. I knew the tone of voice he used when he lied, the movement of his fingers when he felt insecure, the way he avoided looking at those he was afraid to confront. I grabbed the flash drive and hung it on my keychain. If the digital one failed, the physical one would speak for me. Double security, a lesson I learned the hard way. At 3 a.m, I sat on the couch and looked out the window. The city was asleep, but the sky seemed awake. Clouds moved quickly, pushed by a strange wind. I felt the tension of the previous day in my body, that kind of vibration that comes before something important, the sound of a string about to be plucked. I grabbed the blue blazer and left it hanging on the chair, as if waiting for me. I ran my finger along the sewn ribbon, remembering my mother's words. They will try to break you in silence. So learn to rebuild yourself without making noise. On the floor, the clock read 3:27 when the last computer notification appeared. Automatic shipping confirmed. Smile, there was no turning back. I lay down on the couch and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay there, listening to the distant ticking of the clock, imagining the auditorium lights coming on, the technicians adjusting the microphones, the staff arriving with their welcoming smiles. When morning came, they would think they were about to celebrate a project. They didn't know they were about to celebrate their own confession. I woke up to the sound of my phone notification. It was 7:04 a.m. The first light of day filtered through the curtains, and the air had that chilly scent of the beginning of a new year, the kind of smell that always precedes change. I got up slowly, my body tired but my spirit fully awake. I showered, put on my navy blue blazer, and left the ribbon sewn into the hem visible. It was my amulet and my signature. As the coffee brewed, I mentally reviewed each step of the plan. Files, secure. Automatic upload, confirmed. Backups, triplicate. The only thing left now was presence. Being there, looking into their eyes, seeing the impact unfold. The clock ticked 7:40 when Carla sent a message. They're setting up the stage. It starts at 9 a.m. I replied with a simple, perfect. I grabbed the flash drive and tucked it into the inside pocket of my blazer. I took a deep breath in the mirror. My reflection showed me a serene woman, but with a vivid tension in her eyes, the calm you learn when you survive being underestimated. The drive to the company seemed shorter than usual. The streets were still half empty, the traffic light, the cars reflecting the sun like blades. Each traffic light was a reminder of time. Red, patience. Green, progress. When I entered the building, the doorman greeted me with a shy smile. Coming back? Just to see a show, I replied. The elevator rose slowly. In the glass panel, I saw my own reflection magnified. And for a moment I thought of all the times I'd had to split myself to fit into other people's spaces. This time I'd fit in whole. The auditorium floor was unrecognizable. Discreet balloons, panels with motivational phrases, positioned cameras and a huge banner at the back of the stage. Celebrating new leadership. I almost laughed. The irony was so perfect it felt like I'd written it. I sat in the back rows, my phone on my lap, the screen off. The room smelled of expensive coffee and anxiety. Employees laughed too loudly, trying to hide their discomfort. Carla spotted me from afar and pretended to look away, but the quick smile that escaped said it all. We were in sync. To the 8H55 the microphone was tested. The high-pitched sound cut through the air. Eduardo appeared soon after, in a new suit, the same watch gleaming on his wrist. He walked with the studied posture of someone who believes he's won. He greeted the audience, made light-hearted jokes, thanked the team, and took a deep breath before beginning his speech. Today is a historic day for our company, he said, with the intonation of a politician. A project that represents not only innovation, but also our ability to listen and learn. The screen behind him lit up, displaying images of the living neighborhood. My project that I felt my heart beat in time with the ambient music. Eduardo continued. This work was born from the collaboration of a dedicated team and the inspiring mentorship of a very special person. The word mentoring sent a buzz through my head. The audience began to look around. I stood up slowly, adjusting my blazer. His eyes found me in the crowd, and for a moment the speech stalled. Yes, I'm talking about her. He tried to regain his tone, smiling. The brilliant mind who inspired us, even though she's no longer officially with us. The cameras followed me as I walked to the stage, each step making the click of my heels echo on the polished floor like a countdown. I took the microphone from his hands. Thank you, Eduardo, she said firmly. It truly is a historic day. The clock on the wall ticked 9:04 a.m. I saw the red light on the camera. I knew the broadcast link was already live. Smiled. And since we're live, I think it's only fair to show what collaboration really means. The cliffhanger was launched. The pointer advanced, slow and precise, towards the 9:05 a.m. It was the exact second the truth would begin to spread. And this time, there would be no mute button that could silence me. The clock turned to 9:05 a.m., and at that exact second, the sound of my phone vibrating in my pocket was the signal that the world was about to shift. I felt it before I even looked. The automatic transmission had been completed. The evidence was already flying around the internet. Screenshots, audio files, documents, the complete crisis plan. And, ironically, it all began while I was holding their microphone, under the light they never wanted to share. Collaboration, I repeated, letting the word rest on my tongue. A beautiful concept, Eduardo. beautiful but treacherous when used as a disguise. The audience laughed, a little nervously, unsure if that was part of the performance. Eduardo tried to intervene, but I raised my hand firmly, without raising my voice. I wanted to take advantage of the fact that we're live to tell you how this project really came about. I looked at the screen. You know the living neighborhood is a success story. What they don't know is that the ideas, the text, and even the images were taken from a document that bore my name. Behind me, the screens began to flash. First, the logo slide. Then, the screenshot which showed the original authorship field, created by my name. A second later, another appeared, renamed by Eduardo M. The audience began to murmur. Eduardo stepped forward. That's a misunderstanding. The project was a collective one. Then you won't mind if I show you the crisis plan, right? I replied. I clicked on the remote control on the lectern. The screen changed. Now it displayed the internal document with the company letterhead and the cold, straightforward notes. If there is any negative repercussion from the dismissal, reposition my name as a mentor. Avoid direct contact. Use speech of mutual admiration. A piercing silence settled in. The kind of silence that betrays. You know, Eduardo, I continued. It's funny how mutual admiration sounds when it comes from the person who fired me saying, "We don't need another black woman here." The sentence reverberated through the auditorium like thunder. Some people lowered their heads, others looked around, as if searching for an exit. Eduardo paled. That was taken out of context, he stammered. I was talking about professional profile. Racial profiling, you meant. I pointed to the projected document. The context is what it says, and the public can decide the rest. The HR woman stood up from the audience, trying to intervene. Maybe we can work this out privately. Privately, this is where injustices survive, I interrupted. Here they die. The technicians tried to turn off the projector, but the screen wouldn't listen. I had set the file to loop until the end of the broadcast. The entire auditorium was now reading the messages, line by line. Use the narrative of inclusion, I read aloud. That was the tactic. The word, inclusion, as a veneer for the theft. The murmurs turned into a buzz. People filmed with their cell phones, whispers exchanged glances. The broadcast continued live to hundreds of people. That's the problem when you underestimate a black woman's silence, I continued unhurriedly. You think silence is fear. But sometimes, silence is the sound of someone preparing tests. Edward tried to smile, but the smile shattered before it could be born. His face was a picture of ruin. Sweat beaded on his neck, his hands clenched. His lost gaze searching for complicity where only shame remained. Defamation, he whispered without a microphone. Trial, I replied, still smiling. People began to clap, at first timidly, then firmly. A wave of sound grew until it became inevitable. I let the microphone rest on the lectern and glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:09 a.m. 4 minutes was enough. I looked at the audience and concluded. I didn't come to ask for justice. I came to remind you that it exists, and it has a specific address. Applause. Cameras. The noise of truths that, finally, no longer fit on the glass. And, for the first time, Eduardo couldn't find a word that could save him. The sound of applause still echoed when the auditorium lights began to flicker. The technician desperately tried to stop the projection, but the file remained firmly on the screen. Line by line, proof by proof, all there in front of everyone. Each time someone tried to disconnect, another panel would light up, projecting the same image. I had prepared automatic copies. They couldn't erase what was already public. Eduardo stood motionless. His pale face glistened with sweat. The HR woman tried to whisper something, but he couldn't hear. His gaze darted between me, the audience, and the screen, as if trying to find a point where he still had control. There wasn't. I took the microphone back. Do you know what impresses me most about all this? I asked calmly. The care with which they wrote the crisis plan. Not a single word is out of place. So much skill in hiding the error, and no courage to correct it. A quiet chuckle rippled through the auditorium. I continued, "They even planned my role here today. Ironically, they wrote that I would be introduced as a mentor. But they forgot that a mentor teaches. And I taught what happens when a black woman learns to document her own story." A lone round of applause sounded from the back of the room. Another followed. Suddenly, the entire audience was clapping, not in excitement but in liberation. The sound was full, deep, different. The kind of sound made not out of sympathy but out of awareness. Eduardo tried to speak. The microphone hissed in his hands. "This is undue exposure of company data," he said, asserting authority. "We can sue you." I looked at him and smiled. "You can try. But I would advise you not to process evidence that has already been shared with over 300 people, including journalists and lawyers." The audience reacted with a murmur of astonishment. He blinked rapidly, his face tense. The broadcast camera, still on, captured every second. Behind me, the screen projected the last image in the archive. A photo of the original team, the two of us side by side, fake smiles, the slide with my name in the bottom corner. The caption read, "Diversity is the future." "The future," I repeated, looking at the screen, "is what begins when the lie ends." The silence that followed was dense, almost sacred. I felt everyone's eyes on me, not of pity but of respect. It was a new sensation, warm and clean. One of the directors stood up from the front row. "We need to wrap up." "Yes, they do," I replied. "Close the theater. And start the settlement." I took 2 steps forward, the microphone still firmly in my hand. For years, representation was talked about as if it were a favor. Today you saw what it really means. Being present when they try to erase you. The director didn't respond. He just stood there, with the heavy look of someone who understands that history has already been rewritten. At the back of the room, I saw Carla with her cell phone in her hand, tears held back and a small smile. She looked at me as if to say, "It worked out." I put away the microphone, stepped off the stage, and walked toward the exit. The sound of footsteps and applause mingled behind me, creating an almost cinematic soundtrack. As I passed through the glass doors, I heard someone whisper, "She didn't destroy anyone. She just showed the truth." And that was exactly it. Revenge wasn't in humiliation. It was in revealing. In the hallway, I took a deep breath. The air felt lighter, the ground firmer. My phone vibrated, a message from Carla. "The link is everywhere. They can't contain it." Smile. The plan was complete. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just part of the story, I was the one who wrote it. The hallway was filled with voices, cell phones recording, journalists trying to get in, staffers whispering among themselves. The chaos I'd anticipated was already beginning to unfold. I walked past them in silence as the auditorium doors closed behind me, and with them the empire of impunity Eduardo had thought solid. With every step, the sound of clapping still echoed, mixed with the shallow breaths of someone unsure whether to applaud or hide. I didn't look back. I knew the show was now happening without me. In the lobby, a reporter recognized me. "Can you confirm the project was stolen?" she asked, holding out her cell phone. "I confirm that the project has returned to whoever created it," I replied simply and continued walking. The elevator took a while to arrive. With each passing second, I felt the weight of what I had just done merge with a kind of lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of peace that only comes after an earthquake. When the doors opened, I walked in alone. In the metallic mirror, I saw my reflection, the same blue blazer, but now with a different meaning. It wasn't a uniform of obedience. 'Twas armor. The reflection even seemed to smile back at me. Outside, the sun was already beating down. And as the warm wind enveloped me, I noticed something about the city felt different. People looked at me curiously, some with respect, others with the silent recognition of someone who'd seen the broadcast. The cell phone vibrated in my pocket. Message from Carla. He was escorted out of the building. The director called an emergency meeting with the board. The press wants to testify. I sat on a bench near the building's exit and rested my phone on my lap. The warmth of the metal brought me back to my body. I breathed, and each breath felt like something heavy had been lifted from my back. A young employee ran past and stopped in front of me. "I watched," he said breathlessly. "I've never seen anyone do that before." "You'll see more," I replied with a half-smile. "Now that you know it's possible." He nodded, eyes shining, and ran back inside. I opened my phone and logged on. The broadcast already had millions of views. Comments, hashtags, clippings, debates. My name was trending. Among the messages, one made me stop. "She didn't scream. She tasted it." I smiled to myself. That was the gist of it. Justice doesn't need noise. Only precision. A group of black women began tagging me in publications, telling their own stories. Unfair dismissals, stolen credits, erased ideas. It was a wave. And I knew that what I had done wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a positive contagion, the kind of fire that warms instead of destroys. Carla appeared minutes later, panting, her hair a mess, her name tag dangling from her chest. She sat next to me and hugged me tightly, saying nothing. We stayed like that for a while, listening to the city noise as a background soundtrack. "He said he'll retract," he whispered. "Let him try," I replied. "A retraction doesn't erase what was seen." She laughed. "Do you realize that now no one will be able to use your name to clear anything?" "Yes," he said, looking at the sky. "Now he is a registered trademark." The wind blew lightly, bringing the distant scent of rain. A harbinger. I picked up my phone again and typed a short sentence, which I published without thinking. What started as a dismissal became a precedent. Let it serve. I closed the phone and leaned back against the seat. The notifications continued to ring, but it no longer mattered. The sound I wanted to hear was different. The sound of consciousness spreading. Carla stood up, adjusted her bag, and looked at me proudly. "And now? Now I rest. But only for a little while. Because they've just learned that silence can be the most lethal weapon in the world." I looked at the mirrored window of the building. The glass still reflected the word belonging, part of a corporate sticker left over in the hall. For the first time, she made sense. And contrary to what Eduardo believed, there, exactly there, was where I belonged. I returned home as the sun began to set, tinging everything gold, the kind of light that seems to choose what it illuminates. The apartment was the same as always, but the atmosphere was different. The silence, once heavy, now felt like a reward. I took off my blazer and hung it on the chair, the blue ribbon still visible, swaying gently, as if it were breathing with me. I opened the windows. The wind blew in, carrying the smell of the street and the distant sound of horns and hurried footsteps. The world moved on as if nothing had happened, and at the same time as if everything had changed. I grabbed my phone and opened my messages. Hundreds of notifications. People I hadn't seen in years. Women I'd never met, writing from various places saying, "Thank you for speaking up for us. Today, I saw my face in yours." Finally someone showed what they do to us and they still leave smiling. I read each one calmly. I felt the weight and beauty of those words. It was strange. I, who had felt so alone in that office, now heard hundreds of voices mingling with mine. It wasn't fame. It was echo. The news was already talking about a reputation crisis, internal complaints, and ethical processes. Eduardo had disappeared from social media. The company released a formal statement about a conduct review. Nothing could erase what the video revealed. The truth no longer needs captions when everyone has seen the image. I went to the kitchen and made a fresh cup of coffee. I poured it into the same mug I'd used on my first day at that job. The porcelain, cracked at the rim, reminded me that strength isn't about not breaking. It's about remaining useful even when cracked. I sat on the couch with my laptop on my lap and opened a new document. At the top I wrote, Chapter 1, The Day They Fired Me and I Became a Mirror. It wasn't a rant. It was the beginning of a book. Not about revenge but about lucidity. About the exact moment I realized that silence can be a revolution when it carries evidence. Carla sent me a photo. The empty stage, the fallen banner, the chairs stacked. I wrote to her, Every structure falls when the foundation is a lie. She responded with a heart emoji and the phrase, "We won." Smiled. Win wasn't exactly the word. Maybe it was restitute. Or recognize. Because what I conquered wasn't their place. It was mine back. I looked out the window again. The street was bathed in the yellow light of the streetlights. I remembered my mother's face, her hand sewing the blue ribbon that now swung gently on the chair. So you don't forget who you are. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The memory of her washed over me, as if to say, "You did the right thing. And you did it your way." I opened my notebook one last time and typed the final paragraph. They tried to erase me, but they forgot that dark ink marks deeper. Today, every word of mine is a scar and a manifesto. I am not an exception. I am a continuation. I sent the file to Carla, with the title Draft of Justice. Then I turned off the computer, closed my eyes, and let the silence fill the space. Because revenge had already turned into something much bigger, indeed, in legacy and freedom. And before I went to sleep, I whispered to myself, not as a promise but as gratitude, "Thank you for not giving up on being who I am." If you've listened to this story this far, if it touched you in some quiet place, subscribe. Because what comes next isn't the end. It's the beginning of all the voices that have learned that resisting is also writing.